talk a little hockey. Greg Wyshynski, kind enough to join us, senior NHL writer at ESPN. Greg, how you doing?
Hey, Greg.
Hey, everybody. Good to be back.
Hey, good. We're fired up to get you back on the air here. How fired up are you for this Four Nations shootout?
Moderately fired up. Because it's like, it's not the Olympics. It's not even the World Cup of Hockey, which is what they did back in 2016. The fact of the matter is that this tournament exists because they couldn't find a way to do a best-on-best tournament that included Russia. Because if Russia was in it, Finland and Sweden were like, we're not, because of the aggression in Ukraine. So they did the best they could here. They got Sweden and Finland. They got the USA and Canada. They're going to have those teams play each other in a round-robin format. Obviously, Saturday is the day where you get Sweden and Finland, for those who don't know, a blood rivalry between two hockey nations. Those two nations love each other but hate each other. And then that night, 8 o'clock on ABC, you get USA-Canada, in what should be a very raucous atmosphere in Montreal, 20,000 fans waving little Canadian flags, probably some jeering of our anthem, if recent history is any indication, and an environment that's going to lend itself to be a really fun and competitive game. So overall, I mean, it's going to be a fun time. I don't think it's anywhere near as prestigious as what will happen in 2026 with the Olympics. And I just hope that the players that are in this thing are fired up about it and give us some entertaining hockey over the next 2 weeks.
So, Greg, as I've come to understand it, Canada supplies the most athletes to the NHL, correct?
Yeah, they still have the greatest percentage of players in the league. And for a long time, there was certainly a talent disparity between the U.S. and Canada, particularly offensively. But that's changed a lot in the last 20 years, thanks in part to more participation from American players in the game, thanks certainly in part to the expansion of the NHL into what's commonly referred to as non-traditional markets, your Floridas, your Californias, and places like that, where, you know, an entire generation of players is coming from different areas than we normally had. I mean, Austin Matthews, arguably the most talented American player in the world right now, grew up in Arizona. You know, the Hughes brothers spent time in Orlando, Florida. It's certainly become a little bit more imbalanced, but no doubt Canada is still the largest pipeline of players into the NHL.
So when you just look at the rosters as is, who's your favorite?
I think the Americans are the favorite, to be honest with you. I mean, that's certainly a lot of patriotic pride and bias coming into play here. But I mean, the thing that the Americans have this time around that they've not ever had is a very distinct and large advantage in goal versus Canada. You know, the Americans have the best goalie in the world in Connor Hellebuck of the Winnipeg Jets. He won the Vezina Trophy as the league's best goalie last year. It'd be a surprise if he doesn't win it again this year. If he doesn't play, they have Jake Ottinger, the goaltender from the Dallas Stars, as probably his primary backup. They have Jeremy Swayman from the Boston Bruins. They are very loaded in goal in a way that Canada is not. Canada just announced that Jordan Bennington of the St. Louis Blues is going to be their starter for this tournament. And, you know, he's a kind of a grade B-plus goalie versus what the Americans have. So you combine that with probably having the best offensive talent that they've had at an international tournament since maybe the mid-1990s, the ability to have the Tkachuk brothers and Austin Matthews and Jack Eichel and all these great young American players that are representing their country in a tournament like this for the first time. I think they're going to be able to go toe-to-toe with a talented Canadian team. And I clearly think they're better than Sweden and Finland if they play to their expectations.
Does Winnipeg, just in terms of the NHL, do they have the best in net?
Oh, I think so for sure. You know, Hellebuck's a special player, and this year I think his performance might be even more special than last year because of how good the Jets have been. Winnipeg, you know, close to the top of the standings all season long. If you look at how many games they've won and how many games he's won the majority of them. So, you know, we do an awards watch on ESPN every month. It's been interesting to see how many voters whose ballots we sample have him in the front for the MVP of the league, not only best goalie, but also MVP. I think only 4 times since like the early 1980s has a goalie won both MVP and best goaltender in the same season. And Hellebuck right now has the strongest case to do that this season.
So we're, looking at the first part, the first 2/3 of the season here with the Utah Hockey Club. 500 team. They, the management, front office kind of said that's probably what we're looking at this year, and that's what we've got. Is this kind of what you expected from this team this year?
I expect them to be a little bit closer to the wild card right now. Obviously, we still have a lot of hockey to play, and by no means should they be counted out. A couple of real good weeks, and all of a sudden they could be, right back in the mix. But as we, begin play, they've got around a 19% chance of making the playoffs per Stathletes, which is the analytics company ESPN uses. I mean, clearly there have been some real highlights so far for Utah. I think the play of Clayton Keller has been every bit as advertised. I think the unfortunate loss of Dylan Guenther for what was about 11 games this season certainly was a setback and didn't help out their playoff chances. But, if coming into the season was a sense of let's see what we got on this team and then augment it in year two, I think they have a lot to be happy about right now. And there certainly is a good foundation to build on, not discounting the fact that they could still jump up and make the playoffs in their first year in Salt Lake City.
When you look at the remainder schedule, it's 14. I believe it's 14 at home, 12 on the road. And it does feel like there's a little bit of loosening of the schedule in kind of late March, beginning of April. In terms of the schedule and the way that lines up, how much does that play a role? Because, look, we just watched them beat Washington, but then a couple nights previous, you watch them go on a 5-game losing streak to St. Louis, Columbus, Pittsburgh, Ottawa, and Winnipeg. Now, all good teams, but I just don't even understand how much the schedule really plays a role when they're able to knock off one of the top in the East, but can't get a win against some of the lower in the West.
Yeah, and also not play up to snuff at home. I mean, it's one of the weirdest things of the season, to be honest with you, is the fact that you've got this team that was playing its home games in a college hockey arena in Tempe, Arizona, and then gets so excited to transfer over to Utah and play games in front of a full building and an NHL size kind of building. And they've won as many games on home ice as the San Jose Sharks have this year. That's not something to brag about. So they need to play a little bit better at home. They're leaving a lot of points on the table. I mean, 6 overtime losses and shootout losses combined on home ice is not something that's sustainable vis-a-vis trying to make the playoffs. So with a few more home games and road games down the stretch, you just hope that they can kind of figure themselves out on home ice and treat it as the advantage that it should be.
When you see teams get back in action after a long layoff, whether it be this or the Olympics or whatever the case might be, when you're off for nearly 2 weeks, we're an NBA town, so we see 5 or 6 days from a All-Star game, but never anything close to this.
Yeah.
Is there usually a little bit of a ramp up after a long layoff where teams kind of struggle coming out of this?
It's a great question because I don't know what half these guys are doing during this break, and there's a lot of them that obviously aren't involved in this tournament in any way, shape, or form. Far fewer than in the Olympics, which is the other time that we have a significant break in the schedule, and which we'll have next season. It could be a situation where the guys that play in this tournament are going to hit the ice running and not have missed a beat, while some might have gotten out of their routine while they take some R&R during the break. But for the most part, the players I've spoken to that aren't in this tournament are obviously happy to have the break, happy to let their bodies heal up, happy to exhale a little bit and then get right back into the grind. It has been interesting to talk to some of the players that are in for this Four Nations face-off because leading up to it, like a couple days before the break, their minds were clearly on the playoffs. Like they're in a night-to-night grind of checking the standings and battling with their team. And then you go up and ask them, well, what do you think about playing for Sweden in this thing? They're just like, I don't care. Like, I'm trying to make the playoffs here in the NHL. So I find the flipping of the switch mentally for these guys to get into this tournament and then flip it again once it's over to get right back into the playoff grind to be an interesting a trick for a professional athlete.
We got to watch a fun shootout here in the state with Utah, obviously taking on Washington and going to shootout. And by the way, great match. I mean, it was such a fun game, and Ovechkin had 3 assists, and so you got to see one of the legends moving around. And Dylan Guenther goes off. He has an incredible game coming back from his injury. He's been spectacular. But Nick Schmaltz finishes this thing off in a shootout. And the more I watch shootouts, the more I'm curious, how much preparation do these guys that are chosen to go head-to-head with these tenders, how much time do they put into the art and craft and the skill? Because Schmaltz essentially faked him to the left, picked the puck up on his stick, lifted it over the tender's right shoulder, and forced it into the net. And it's like, geez, the skill and ability to put that puck on a long, extended stick on just probably a 2 or 3 inch blade. It's incredible what they do.
It is absolutely incredible, and you're right about that game. By the way, I watched the first period of that game, and the Capitals have been a team that has really kept things in their control for much of the season, and I think Utah put a real scare into them early in that game with the way they played in the first period. To answer your question, so every team has these iPads on the bench, and the iPads bring up a lot of statistical information during the game, from how much guys have played ice time wise to face-off percentage wins and things like that. But they also have, courtesy of their advanced scouting, a book on a goaltender, let's say, what their shootout tendencies are, and which way they move and where they're strongest in trying to save the puck. And conversely, teams have a book on the shooters that teams typically use in the shootout, and they'll have an idea of their tendencies and what attempts they've made throughout the season, which is why you see teams try to change it up usually with a guy that maybe hasn't taken a ton of shootout opportunities in the season. Maybe there's not as much detail on what they're expected to do. But, yeah, it's just like in the NFL or anywhere else. There's a lot of advanced scouting that goes on and a lot of information readily available to teams in the shootout to have a good understanding of, where the shooter should shoot and where the goalies should think about where these guys might be taking the puck.
Learning about the league and the landscape and the different styles of hockey out there, it's been really fun to kind of analyze who does what and who's really good at what. And watching Florida just be the schoolyard bully and just wanting to knock your head off. Is that really unique for them, or is there a lot of teams that try to do that and Florida's just better at it than everybody else in identifying the talent that can play at that kind of physicality?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. Like, the thing that separates Florida from everybody else, and the reason they've now been to the Cup final in consecutive years and won the Cup last year, is that their best players are also their most physical players. And that is a rarity in this league. Usually your best players, you'll have maybe like a couple physical guys, but then you'll also have some smaller skill guys that don't necessarily bring it. But when you talk about Barkov and Reinhart and Bennett and Tkachuk and all these guys that form the core of that team, those are the kinds of guys that other teams try to trade for at the deadline to add to their lineup. But that's the lineup for Florida. So you're absolutely right. I mean, it is a rare thing for a team to have their best players also be able to bring it physically like they do. And it's a luxury that other teams simply don't have.
So this is this Four Nation thing. Just give me a little bit of background on it. How long has this been going? And because we're new to this, how long has this been going? Like, how significant is this? I know you were putting in terms to the Olympics and that, but how long has it been going?
Well, it's the first year they're doing it. They're doing it instead of having an all-star game. They're going to have this tournament. And really, it's the combination of the players having the appetite to do more international-type tournament stuff. The NHL players were last in the Olympics in 2014 in Sochi, and then the NHL did not send them to the next couple of Olympics. They're going back to the Olympics next year in Italy. And so there was a sense of, we'd like to have a little appetizer before the main course, do something international tournament-wise this season, in the middle of the season, and whet everybody's appetite for the Olympics next year. The league obviously loves the idea of expanding its revenue footprint. There's a game between Sweden and Finland on Saturday at 1 p.m. that's going to be in prime time over there. And so that's going to be a real big deal and a big moneymaker for the league with their international broadcast partners and stuff. So it's not going to happen. I mean, it might be the only time we get this event, to be honest with you, because the theory for the NHL is you go Olympics in 26, you go World Cup of Hockey in 28, then you go Olympics in 30, World Cup in 32, and then kind of have that cadence going forward. But as I mentioned earlier, a lot of that depends on the situation with Russia. Russia is actually banned from international competition by the International Ice Hockey Federation for the 25-26 season, which means that the International Olympic Committee is going to have to figure out how to incorporate Russian players into the Olympic tournament. So all of that's happening on the world stage at the same time the NHL is trying to figure out plans for a World Cup in 2028, and it looms over all the decisions that they make, which is why we're limited to just 4 teams in this tournament over the next 2 weeks.
Interesting. Well, Greg, we appreciate your time. Thanks for hanging out with us, and look forward to catching up with you again soon. Always great info.
Thanks, Greg.
Absolutely. Anytime. Thanks for having me.
Greg Wyshynski, ESPN NHL writer and host podcasts as well. Great dude.